Good morning and welcome to the latest edition of On the Whistle, where we're going to be talking about Rayo Vallecano 3, Sunderland 0, but we're also going to be chatting about Sunderland 1, Augsburg 0, because of course, two final pre-season friendlies back to back this weekend, Sunderland's last big kind of audition out of the Premier League season. As I guess maybe we would have kind of expected, two really contrasting games and two really contrasting results. We're going to start with the Vallecano one because that was a lot more recent. Obviously, the headline result is a little bit scary and feels a little bit disastrous, losing 3-0 in your final pre-season friendly. But it was a weird one because I didn't come away feeling all that negative about it, in the sense that Rayo Vallecano finished 8th in La Liga last season, and I thought you could see why yesterday. I thought they were excellent. I thought their control of possession, their intensity, the way the switches of play that they were able to pull off on a regular basis were really, really strong. I thought they were a really, really good side who would have been a match for anyone really on the day. And although I thought Sunderland's performance was poor, it's not genuinely something that I'm overly concerned about at this point, because I thought there were patches of the game where they were okay, there were patches of the game where they were really poor, but some of that I think was just down to the reality of the team that was put out there. It was about getting 90 minutes for these players for when they're needed in the weeks ahead. And I think the thing that would probably sum it up for me is, playing Harrison Jones at left back and Alan Brown on the left wing. I actually think both of them did a really decent job, given the fact that they're operating well out of position. But when you play two right-footed centre midfielders on the left flank, you're really easy to defend against because you don't really have a lot of pace to take people on. They always have to cut back inside. And so I just think there were reasons why Sunderland were kind of outclassed, really. And I actually thought there were a couple of kind of positives from the game. I thought that, you can't praise the centre midfield too much when you've lost 3-0, but I thought that Dan Neil had probably his sharpest game in pre-season. And I thought, although he wasn't really influential throughout the game, I think you could see flashes of real quality from Enzo Le Fée, particularly later on, when Timo Tutierov came on, he was a real nuisance. I thought he played some really good passes for him, and actually caused the Vallecano defence some problems. So, yeah, look, I think it's incredibly obvious coming away from that game that Sunderland need more defensive depth. At the moment we saw yesterday, that was a makeshift back four, players coming back from long-term injuries, young players who we know aren't quite going to be ready for the Premier League yet. So for sure, it kind of highlighted that alarm, if you like, that this is a squad that desperately needs some defensive depth. But I think the reality is that yesterday's game was about getting the 4 or 5 players who are going to be a big part of Labrisa's plans for this season more minutes. And ultimately that's what happened. Isidore and Rig got over an hour under their belt. I thought they looked really rusty, and that contributed to obviously the challenges that Sunderland had. But I would expect that. Rig hasn't played at all in pre-season. Isidore hasn't trained with the team until earlier this week, since the Sevilla game in Portugal. So, I would expect them to look rusty. I would expect them not to be at their best. But moving forward, it's obviously a massive positive that they've been able to get some minutes under their belt before the start of the new season. And I think that what happened yesterday also has to be put in the context of the fact that the performance the day before against Augsburg was pretty good. The only real thing that let Sunderland down was their finishing. They could have really scored 3 goals minimum in the first half, and I thought they were completely dominant. Yes, they gave a penalty away, but to be honest, I've watched it back a few times. I'm really not convinced that's a penalty. It's marginal at best. Noah Siddiqui's challenge. In the second half, Sunderland kind of showed the other side of the game, where I thought they sat in a bit and they sort of stood off the opposition a bit, kept their shape really well, defended really well. Robin Ruffs made one brilliant save flying to his right from a header from across. But other than that, Sunderland never looked too threatened, and were a little bit of a threat on the break as well. So overall, if you look at the kind of the bigger picture of the weekend, no new injuries, 90 minutes under the belt pretty much for every player who's prominent in sort of Labrisa's thinking for the new season. I do think there were some positives from it. Obviously it's really tough to watch Sunderland lose 3-0 at the Stadium Light in any scenario, and obviously feel for the supporters who came down on the Sunday afternoon and watched that, because it was particularly sort of at times in the second half, it was a really tough watch. So I do appreciate that. But in the context of the Premier League season coming up, it's not something that I think will have an overly huge impact. It's something we have seen before, albeit not at the Stadium Light, where I can think of a couple of occasions where Sunderland have finished their pre-season with friendlies at Hartlepool, and have used that game to top up sort of minutes of fringe players. The team's been padded out with younger players, and Sunderland have performed really poorly and been beaten. So I don't think it's something we should get to look too far into in terms of what's actually ahead this season in the Premier League. Other than, of course, that's absolutely right, as it did show that in some positions Sunderland needs some more depth. There's absolutely no getting around that. That's clearly a fact. So let's have a look at some of these questions that you've sent in and have a bit of a chat about a couple of things. Now, obviously, I asked these questions straight after the game yesterday, so some of them were before a bit of breaking news came out this morning, but we'll kind of box that off now. So Ian says, some clear area to strengthen his defence. In my opinion, we need 2 centre-backs and another right-back for the squad. Do you think a centre-back happens before West Ham? And what's the latest on Alderete? And I think I had another one on this mould. Yes, Michael says, do you think RLB is playing down the defender hunt? It's essential we have one in and ready for Saturday. So Michael referring to Lebris's comments after the game, where he basically said he didn't know if someone would sign a centre-half in time to face West Ham on Saturday. Now, obviously, we know since then that the deal for Getafe defender Omar Alderete, Paraguayan international, 27 years old, has been agreed. So around a 11 million pound sort of package deal. And he's, I think, now been cleared to travel away side to have his medical. So a centre-half will be signed, I think, in time for the West Ham United game. One slight caveat I would add to that is it's still very much waiting to see what Alderete's fitness and match fitness is like, because I've been doing a bit of digging this morning, and there will be a specific video on Alderete up later today, so it's a double on the whistle day. Lucky for you. But yeah, one of the things I did notice is that he hasn't had much of a pre-season. He's only played 45 minutes for Getafe across the whole of pre-season so far. So hopefully he's match fit and he can go straight in on Saturday, providing that deal progresses as hoped. But I think while this is a big signing for the season as a whole, I do think there's a chance that he possibly won't be match fit for Saturday, but we'll have to wait and see on that one. We're not definitive on that one. Arthur Masuaku obviously is in, could play left back, which would allow Reynaldo potentially to go to centre back for West Ham. But again, Masuaku obviously not involved yesterday. Has been a free agent over pre-season, so doesn't have any match fitness. Can he go straight in against West Ham? It's a really difficult question for Lebris for that one. So clearly, Sunderland are going to get centre-half in the coming days. I think that's now, obviously the Loriente one makes us always a little bit cautious about that, but that's clearly the direction of travel. Whether he can start against West Ham United is obviously the second question. And just on Ian points there about needing 2 centre-backs, we actually put this question to Lebris as well yesterday. In his view, he was quite non-committal, but he basically said it will depend who's available. So I think Sunderland are open to a scenario where they sign 2 centre-backs, which allows Jensen Seelt to then go out on loan. So we can have a full season playing week in, week out. That's not a reflection of Sunderland thinking, Seelt's a bad player. Quite the opposite. I think he's proven in pre-season that he could be a good player for the long term. But I think the ideal scenario would be to get 2 centre-backs to allow Seelt to go out on loan. However, that obviously depends on availability, and what Sunderland don't want to do is buy players for the sake of it when they have got a talented young player in Jensen Seelt there, bearing in mind that Luke O'Nien will be back in September. So one to watch. I definitely don't think Sunderland are done just because they've signed Alderete, but I think it will depend on whether they can get a player who they really feel improves the squad overall. So a comment here from Tenchi, who says, just hope people can get some perspective in pre-season. The results counts for nothing. We will need a squad of 22, 23 players to be ready, regardless if it's from last year or new ones in the door. They're all equally important as the next. So we've got a comment here from David, and I think there was a similar one here. Yeah. So I'll put these two together. So feel the balance of the 2 lineups could have been shared better, or better arranging of fixtures. Some of our main players would have gained little from the Sunday game. And Akko says, would love to hear your take on this weekend. First team travelling to Germany and second team, for want of better words, playing at home. Today was so weak and uncompetitive. I thought it would be other way around and less travel for main players. Yeah, so I think, it's a really interesting point. And I think that the thing is, I agree that the optics of someone's better performance away from home when not many people would have seen it, and someone's worst performance at home when lots of people saw it, is not great and it doesn't help the mood. I think the reality is Sunderland have to obviously make a decision about what the best preparation for their players for West Ham is. And I guess the main thing is that the players who are going to play against West Ham have an extra recovery day by playing on Saturday. And the other thing I would say is that this weekend was obviously logistically challenging because Sunderland didn't know until the very end of the season, whether this was going to be the first weekend of their championship season or whether they were going to have a, inverted commas, free weekend. So that's one thing I would say, is that, you know, a lot of other teams will have had their pre-season preparations already in place. Sunderland didn't have that luxury because of the playoffs. So I think that's one slight mitigating factor, I would say. I agree that the two completely different teams. I really feel for some of those players who are close to the starting 11, but not quite there, because I feel like it does feel like a little bit of a stitch up sometimes. You go in against a really strong opposition in a team where loads of players are out of position, you've got loads of inexperienced players, and it's almost like, go on then, tear it up and show what you're all about. But the dynamics of the game make that really difficult. So I do sympathise with the players, but Lebris acknowledged that after the game, and he made clear that, you know, Neil, Roberts, Le Fée, these guys, he's not really judging them on their performance. It's about the minutes, and he still sees them as a massive part of their plans, and what he's seeing behind the scenes is more important. So yeah, I agree that it doesn't look or feel great the way the weekend panned out, and it's sort of a little bit of a sad note, if you like, to end the pre-season campaign on. But I guess the reality is we'll be able to make a better decision after the West Ham game. I think, you know, the main thing is, from Lebris's perspective, is an extra recovery day for the main players, if you like, and also that he wants the core of that team to be playing together as much as possible. And the one thing he has said to me as well, which I would note, is that he knows Dan Neil, Enzo Le Fée, Wilson Eastoe, Patrick Roberts, they know the philosophy, they know the system, they know the shape, they know the roles within it. Noah Siddiqui, players like this, Chemstein, Talby, Simon Adingra, they're learning it. He knows that if he has to drop Dan Neil in, he understands the role. And so I think that's why he's maybe focused a little bit more on some of the other players. Having said that, I do think the team that played against Augsburg will probably be pretty much, if not exactly, the team that plays against West Ham. But hopefully a few kind of things to think about within that. Chris says, do you think Sealt is ready to play Premier League football? Is it even fair to expect him to? I think my feeling is that I would rather have play Sealt on Saturday and have Reynaldo at left back than have Reynaldo at centre back and have someone filling in at left back, if that makes sense, judging on the performances that I've seen in pre-season. Because I think you have to be fair to Sealt and say that at times his form's been a little bit up and down in pre-season, but I would expect that for a player coming back from such a long-term injury. But against the really strong opponents, I think he's been excellent. I thought he was arguably one of Sunderland's best players on Saturday against Augsburg. I thought he was excellent in Portugal both times that I saw him. And so if the centre-back who comes in isn't match fit, then I do think Sealt deserves an opportunity to play. I have no idea how he will go. It will be a risk, it will be a gamble. There's absolutely no two ways about that. But I do think over the course of pre-season, he's earned that opportunity rather than Reynaldo being pushed inside and a player filling in at full-back. That's my view, but there's no doubt about it that, you know, there's a little bit of a risk there. I think that's obvious. Couple of last ones. So this one is from Lebris Ball, who says, do you think the club will strengthen further in centre midfield? Brown likely to part, Siddiqui and Diarra at AFCON. That leaves 18-year-old Rig and Dan Neil as depth options. Also, if Xhaka is injured or suspended, Neil is next in line as a 6 in the PL. I don't think Sunderland will recruit unless somebody leaves. You never quite know this summer. Lots of things happen, but I think that, yeah, 6 into 3, I think Sunderland will be happy with that. It's the right balance between there being really fierce competition, but also every player feels they're close to the squad and you don't have anyone who's kind of discontented and whose head's dropping behind the scenes. I think if Neil was to leave, and obviously his contract situation means that you can't rule it out, Sunderland will go back into the market, but I think they'll be happy with the options that they have at the moment. That's just my instinct. Let's wait and see. And I'm going to end on this one with Kevs, who said, should we be worried about Enzo not being with the inverted commas first team at Augsburg? And then says, Dan Neil played well today, huge shame if he was to leave. Yeah, I agree with you, Kev. As I mentioned at the start of the video, I thought that kind of the positives beneath the surface of the result yesterday, with that I thought Neil and Le Fée both looked sharp, motivated, ready to play a part. We asked Lebris about both players after the game, and it was really interesting because, to be honest, he was pretty candid about the fact that Le Fée might be on the bench against West Ham. He did kind of say, you know, that there was a chance he would be, as he calls him, a finisher. But beyond that, he was really, really clear that that could change in a matter of days, that could change in a matter of weeks, that he's determined to have 15, 16 players who are absolutely ready to start every game and impact every game. He couldn't have been clearer that Le Fée was firmly in that category. So at this point, Kev, I'm not worried. I don't think fans should be worried. Of course, we'll keep an eye on how things develop over the course of the season. But just because he isn't necessarily in line to start the first game, that doesn't mean he's not in line to start the second or the third or the fourth game, and he's definitely still a big part of the club's plans. Labrice was also really clear that Neil's a big part of his plans this season and that he's really comfortable with his role in the squad. He feels he's ready to make an impact, albeit, of course, he will have to sort of compete with Xhaka, and that will mean there's at times on the bench. Now, obviously, as I mentioned before, that situation is a little bit different because of the contract scenario, and we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. But at the moment, Labrice is certainly counting on them both to be part of the squad for the season. So let's see how that one develops in the next few days and weeks and months. So yeah, I think that'll do for now. As I mentioned, it's a double on the whistle day, so hopefully by the end of the day there'll be a couple of videos for you to watch. I'll be doing a shorter but a bit more of a deep dive on Omar Alderete later today. So if you're watching this and you haven't seen this, might be worth checking back later and seeing if that's there to watch as well. Really looking forward to seeing so many of you at the live show on Monday night. We are now sold out, I'm told, which is absolutely fantastic. Really looking forward to seeing you there. Come armed with some questions. And yeah, I'll tell you everything you need to know about how to get that sorted when you come down. So yeah, as ever, thanks for watching.